If you walk into, well, almost any major art museum in the world, you are basically guaranteed to see a painting of the Crucifixion of Jesus.
Oh, absolutely. Thousands of them.
Right, and there's usually this very specific aesthetic to it. It's almost serene, you know. The subject is elevated, the skin is pale, but essentially intact.
Maybe a single neat drop of blood on the forehead.
Exactly, just one drop.
Hmm.
It's presented with this quiet, tragic dignity. But if you put away the paint and actually pick up modern medical pathology and like the first century Roman execution records, the biological reality of that event looks completely different.
Yeah, I mean, classical art was designed to inspire devotion, right? It was never meant to serve as a crime scene photograph.
Right.
But over centuries, we've been so conditioned to see the symbol that we've entirely lost sight of the historical and, well, the physiological mechanics of what was actually happening on that hill.
Which is exactly why we are setting aside the stained glass windows for this deep dive. Our goal today is to strip away centuries of that stylized artwork and look at the gritty, undeniable reality of this event. And to do that, for you listening, we're using a very specific stack of sources.
A really fascinating stack, actually.
Yeah, it's wild. We have a peer-reviewed medical analysis from the Journal of the American Medical
The
Association.
JMMI.
Right, JMA. Plus, we've got historical and archaeological records of ancient Roman execution practices, some geographic data on the ancient site of Golgotha, and a theological index tracking over 100 ancient textual prophecies.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. And just to be clear with you from the jump, we aren't here to preach or take sides on the spiritual implications of all this.
Right, we're keeping it strictly analytical.
Exactly. We are simply taking the stack of documents from ancient texts to modern pathology to impartially report on how they converge on this single world-altering event. So, okay, let's unpack
This
this.
is good.
Before we get into the biological reality of the first century, we actually have to rewind the clock much further back, like to the ancient texts that allegedly mapped this all out.
Yeah, the textual blueprint is really a crucial starting point here. The source material highlights this compilation of prophecies from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and the timeline it's really what stands out.
How far back are we talking?
Well, many of these predictions were recorded 500, 800, or even over 1,200 years before the first century.
See, I always have a natural skepticism about things like that. If you're listening and thinking, well, couldn't someone have just edited those ancient texts after the fact to make them match the event? Like, how do historians actually date these prophecies?
Oh, it's a very fair question. I mean, the historical safeguard against that kind of retroactive editing is the Septuagint.
The Greek translation, right?
Exactly. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, which was completed roughly 200 to 300 years before Jesus was even born.
Wow, okay.
And we also have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date back to the centuries before the event as well. So from a purely historical standpoint, we know definitively that these texts existed in their current form long before the Roman Empire even occupied Judea.
And the details in these locked-in texts are just wild. To put it in perspective, that's like someone in the year 800 AD.
During the Viking Age, basically.
Right. A Viking-era writer writing down the exact specific details of a political execution happening today.
Right.
Like you've got the prophet Zechariah writing more than 500 years prior, predicting the subject will be betrayed for exactly 30 pieces of silver.
Which is so specific.
It is. And he specifically notes that those silver pieces would be thrown into the house of the Lord to buy a potter's field.
Furthermore, if you look at Isaiah, writing over 700 years prior, he describes a man who is despised, rejected, and led like a lamb to the slaughter without opening his mouth.
Right, the lamb imagery.
Yeah, and he predicts this figure would be assigned a grave with the wicked, but ultimately buried with the rich. Which, in the historical accounts, the subject is executed between two thieves.
The wicked.
Exactly. But his body is claimed and placed in the newly hewn tomb of a wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea.
That's crazy. But the Book of Psalms is what really caught my attention in the sources, because it gets into the actual mechanics of the execution.
Oh, Psalm 22.
Yeah. It reads like a 1,000-year-old architectural blueprint for a building.
Yeah.
But it features technology that hasn't even been invented yet. Psalm 22 describes a band of evil men encircling the victim, piercing his hands and feet, and casting lots for his clothing.
What's fascinating here is how entirely out of place that description was for the time it was written. I mean, the Jewish method of capital punishment under Mosaic law was stoning.
Just throwing rocks.
Right. The concept of being hung on a tree as a curse is mentioned in Deuteronomy, sure, but the specific mechanics of nailing hands and feet, that was a foreign invention that didn't exist in that region.
So you have a text predicting the piercing of hands and feet centuries before the Romans even arrived with the nails. That is wow.
It's a huge anomaly.
So if that's the ancient textual setup, let's look at the actual medical timeline.
Hmm.
According to that JAMA medical analysis, the physiological breakdown doesn't start on the cross. It starts the night before in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right. The historical accounts note that Jesus was in such profound emotional agony that his sweat became like blood.
Which, to a modern reader, just sounds like hyperbole. Sweating blood.
Yeah.
I always assumed that was just poetic license from the writers.
Most people do. But medically, it's a documented, albeit incredibly rare, condition known as hematidrosis.
How does the body even physically do that?
Well, it requires an absolute overdrive of the sympathetic nervous system. So, under states of extreme, profound psychological stress, the body releases chemicals that cause the capillaries.
The tiny blood vessels.
Right, the tiny blood vessels feeding the sweat glands. It causes them to dilate so violently that they actually rupture.
Oh my.
Yeah. Blood hemorrhages directly into the sweat glands, mixes with the sweat, and then literally exudes from the pores.
That is horrifying.
Now, the volume of blood loss isn't lethal on its own, but it leaves the skin in a highly sensitized, fragile state.
So the skin is already completely compromised, which, I mean, that makes the next step, the Roman scourging, even more devastating.
Exactly.
We often think of flogging as just this mindless, chaotic torture in a dungeon, like a movie villain just wailing on someone. But reading the historical records, you realize the Romans were brutally efficient. This was a highly calculated procedure.
Oh, scourging was a legal preliminary to almost every Roman execution, and it was performed by trained soldiers called lictors.
Specialists.
Right. The instrument they used was the flagellum. This wasn't a standard Indiana Jones whip. It consisted of a sturdy handle with several braided leather thongs attached, and at intervals along those leather straps, they tied small iron balls and sharp, jagged pieces of sheep bone.
The JAMA article breaks down the tissue damage from this in a way that is really hard to stomach. The victim is stripped, tied to a low pillar, and struck repeatedly. And those iron balls cause deep, massive contusions, basically tenderizing the tissue.
Then the sharp sheep bones do their work. As the whip is dragged back, those jagged bones cut through the epidermis, the subcutaneous tissues, and eventually they tear straight into the underlying skeletal muscles.
Sorry, straight to the muscle.
Yes, the trauma is so severe that it induces hypovolemic shock.
Let's break that term down for the listener.
Sure. Hypo, meaning low, volemic, referring to volume, so low blood volume. The massive loss of blood and tissue fluid causes the blood pressure to just plummet. The heart starts racing to pump blood that simply isn't there anymore.
Which means the victim is already in a state of pre-shock, basically barely clinging to life, before they even reach the execution site.
That's the Roman efficiency you mentioned.
Right. They engineered it perfectly to bring a person to the absolute brink of death without tipping them over the edge.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the mechanics of the cross itself. Our sources really dismantle the Hollywood version of this, don't they?
They do. The history of the device is this grim evolution. The Assyrians started the concept by simply impaling victims on stakes. The Persians adopted it. Alexander the Great brought it over to the Mediterranean, but the Romans, they perfected it.
For them, it wasn't just killing someone.
No, it was state-sponsored terrorism. It was reserved for slaves, revolutionaries, and the absolute worst criminals to serve as the ultimate public deterrent.
And structurally, the sources point out, the victim wasn't carrying a giant unified cross like we see in every movie.
No, a scourged victim in hypovolemic shock physically could not carry an entire cross. I mean, those weighed upwards of 300 pounds.
Right.
Roman practice dictated that the upright post-stipes was actually left permanently fixed in the ground at the execution site. The victim was only forced to carry the horizontal crossbar.
The patibulum.
Right, the patibulum. That weighed around 75 to 125 pounds, and it was wrapped across their shoulders.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Going back to those serene museum paintings we talked about at the start, almost every single one shows the iron nails driven right through the center of the palms.
Right.
But the archaeological and medical sources say that is anatomically impossible.
Completely impossible. The JAMA analysis is very clear on this. The flesh and ligaments of the human palm simply cannot support the weight of a suspended body.
It would just rip out.
Exactly. If you drive a nail through the palm, the weight will cause the nail to tear straight through the fingers. The Romans were expert executioners, so they knew this, which is why they drove the nails through the wrists.
Wait, if the paintings are all wrong, do we actually have physical proof of how the Romans did it, like dug out of the ground?
We do, yeah. In 1968, an excavation in northern Jerusalem uncovered a first-century ossuary, a bone box belonging to a crucified man named Yehohanan. Lodged in his heel bone was this tapered 5 to 7-inch iron nail, and forensic analysis of his upper extremities showed the nail was driven between the long bone of the forearm, the radius, and the small carpal bones of the hand.
Which, in ancient terminology, the wrist was considered part of the hand.
Exactly.
And think about the anatomy there. Driving a square iron spike through that specific gap in the wrist isn't just about securing the body to the wood. The sources say it guarantees the nail will crush the sensorimotor median nerve.
Yes.
To understand how that feels for you listening, imagine hitting your funny bone, which is actually your ulnar nerve. And we all know that sudden blinding jolt of electricity. Now multiply that by 1,000.
Yeah, the median nerve being crushed by iron would send fiery bolts of agony up both arms. And the neurological damage would also cause the hands to involuntarily cramp and contract into this rigid, claw-like state.
Ugh, that is rough.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the anatomy shows us the true intent of the punishment. There are no major arteries in those specific locations of the wrist or the feet.
Oh, so they aren't bleeding to death from the nails.
No, the nailing was intentionally designed to be relatively bloodless. The Romans wanted the body suspended, fully conscious, for hours or even days to artificially prolong the agony.
So we understand the horrifying engineering behind the how. But let's shift gears for a second and look at the where. Because if you're the Roman Empire and you've designed a machine for maximum public humiliation, where do you put it?
Well, you put it where everyone can see it. Executions were always held outside the city walls, typically along major thoroughfares. The textual sources identify the specific location as Golgotha, and the Wikipedia source tracks the etymology of that. It derives from the Aramaic word Golgotha, translating to place of the skull. The Greek equivalent is cranion, and the Latin is calvariae.
Which gives us the English word Calvary.
Exactly.
Why place of the skull did it actually look like one?
That's one of the main theories. In the 19th century, a scholar named Otto-Thenius and Major General Charles Gordon identified a rocky escarpment north of the Damascus Gate. It literally has 2 sunken caves that look like the hollow eyes of a skull.
That's creepy.
Yeah, it leads to the name Gordon's Calvary. However, the overwhelming historical and archaeological consensus points to a different location entirely, which is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands today.
The history of how that traditional site was preserved is honestly my favorite part of this entire deep dive, because it's just a spectacular historical backfire.
Oh, it really is. So, following the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, the Roman Emperor Hadrian completely leveled Jerusalem and rebuilt it as a pagan city called Aelia Capitolina.
He wanted to wipe the slate clean.
Right. He wanted to permanently eradicate any Jewish or Christian veneration of holy sites, so he intentionally buried the traditional site of Golgotha under tons of earth and built a massive sprawling temple to Aphrodite right on top of it.
So what does this all mean? The emperor who wanted to pave over the site and erase it from human memory essentially built a giant neon sign saying, it happened exactly right here.
Precisely the opposite of his intention. The temple acted as a massive historical anchor. 2 centuries later, when Constantine's mother, Helena, arrived in Jerusalem searching for the crucifixion site, the local Christian community simply pointed to the Temple of Aphrodite.
I mean, they knew.
They knew. They excavated beneath the pagan temple and found the ancient limestone quarry and the rocky outcrop. Modern archaeologists have even found graffiti beneath the church dating back to the time of Hadrian's temple, confirming early Christians were quietly venerating the spot the entire time.
That is just incredible. Okay, so we've mapped the exact location and we've broken down the brutal setup on the cross. Let's bring it all back to the JAMA medical analysis to answer the final, ultimate question here. How did this actually kill you? We know it wasn't blood loss from the nails.
Right. The primary medical cause of death in crucifixion is exhaustion asphyxia.
Suffocation.
Essentially, yes. When a victim is suspended by their arms, the downward weight of the body pulls on the pectoral muscles and the intercostal muscles, the ones between the ribs. This effectively locks the chest into a permanent state of inhalation.
Meaning your lungs are full of air, but you physically cannot breathe out.
Passive exhalation is completely impossible. So, to push the carbon dioxide out of the lungs, the victim has to actively fight gravity. They have to push up on that iron nail driven through their feet while simultaneously flexing their elbows and pulling up on the crushed median nerves in their wrists.
It's an agonizing seesaw. I mean, you have to push your entire body weight onto shattered nerves and pierced bones just to take a single breath out.
Yes.
And let's not forget the flogging from earlier. Every time the victim pushes up to exhale, their lacerated back is scraping violently against the rough, splintered wood of the upright post.
It's a relentless cycle. Push up to exhale, collapse back down in exhaustion. Eventually, the muscles succumb to fatigue and severe tetanic cramps, which are these uncontrollable, agonizing muscle spasms caused by the buildup of lactic acid.
Like the worst cramp you've ever had, but everywhere.
Everywhere. And when the cramps lock the muscles entirely, the victim can no longer push up at all. Carbon dioxide builds up in the blood and asphyxiation takes over. Fun fact, the Latin root for the word excruciating literally translates to out of the cross.
Out of the cross.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, the sources mention the Romans had a method for speeding this up if they were in a hurry, right? Like if they didn't want to wait days.
Yes. If they needed the victim dead quickly, for instance, before the start of the Jewish Sabbath at sundown, they practiced something called Crucifixion.
Which is?
A soldier would use a heavy iron mallet to shatter the tibia and fibula of the victim's lower legs. Without intact legs to push up on, asphyxiation would occur in a matter of minutes. The historical accounts record the soldiers breaking the legs of the two men executed alongside Jesus.
But they skipped him.
They did. When they came to the center cross, they found he was already dead. The rapid onset of death was likely due to the extreme severity of the initial scourging, which, remember, had already put him in profound hypovolemic shock. And if we connect this back to our first segment, the detail of his legs being left unbroken perfectly mirrors those ancient prophecies regarding the Passover lamb, which mandated that not a single bone of the sacrifice could be broken.
That's wild how that ties back. Yeah. But even if he looked dead, I mean, the Romans were professionals. They weren't going to just take his word for it and hand over a live body to his family.
No, they needed absolute certainty. So to verify death, a Roman infantryman took a spear and thrust it upward into Jesus' side. And the Gospel of John, written in the 1st century, reports an incredibly specific detail. The spear thrust produced a sudden flow of blood and water.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, water flowing out of a spear wound just sounds like a myth, you wouldn't be alone. It sounds totally symbolic. But the JMA analysis breaks this down pathologically, and it is fascinating.
It really is. The Greek text uses the word pleura for the side, indicating the rib cage. The medical consensus is that the spear entered the right side of the chest, perforating the right lung, the pericardium, which is the sac surrounding the heart, and ultimately piercing the right atrium or ventricle of the heart.
But biologically, where is the water coming from? People don't have water in their chest.
It's a direct result of the hypovolemic shock we discussed earlier.
Oh.
Yeah. In a state of severe shock and impending heart failure, the body begins pooling fluids around the lungs and the heart. These are known as pleural and pericardial effusions.
And they look like water.
To the naked eye, they look exactly like water. They are clear and serous. So the spear would have pierced these fluid-filled sacs first, releasing the clear water, followed immediately by a flow of dark, thick blood from the chambers of the heart.
Wow.
And this raises a really important question for historians. Medical science in the 1st century had absolutely no understanding of pleural and pericardial effusions forming as a result of hypovolemic shock.
They didn't know what shock was.
Exactly. If an ancient writer were simply inventing a dramatic story to impress people, they would just say the spear produced a massive flow of blood. Adding water to the narrative is entirely counterintuitive.
It makes no sense to a 1st century brain.
None. Yet modern pathology tells us it is exactly biologically what happens. How does a 1st century writer invent a counterintuitive medical anomaly that modern science only fully explained centuries later?
It's a phenomenal question, and it really captures what makes this deep dive so compelling. When you look at the totality of these sources, the convergence is just staggering. You have ancient texts predicting specific mechanical details of a foreign execution method over a millennium before the device was even used in that region.
Yeah.
You have 1st century archaeological ossuaries physically confirming those exact anatomical mechanics down to the wrist bones, and you have modern medical science verifying the biological timeline from the hematidrosis in the garden to the shock of the scourging to the asphyxiation, right down to the pericardial fluid released by the spear.
I think whether you approach these sources as someone interested in history, in medicine, or in the preservation of ancient texts, having a factual grasp of these mechanics completely changes your perspective. It grounds one of the world's most ubiquitous cultural symbols in a gritty, undeniable historical reality.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. The historical records prove that the Roman Empire put immense engineering, architectural, and medical calculation into the cross. It was explicitly designed by a superpower to be the ultimate instrument of terror, of public humiliation, and of total historical erasure.
They engineered it so you would be forgotten.
Completely forgotten. So consider the paradox here. How deeply ironic is it that an instrument explicitly designed by an empire to permanently erase a person became, instead, the single most recognized symbol of hope, survival, and identity for billions of people across the globe? It certainly makes you look at those serene, stylized paintings in the museum a whole lot differently. Knowing the brutal, calculated reality behind the paint makes the survival of that symbol infinitely more powerful.